This course is titled Modern Poetry, and T.S. Eliot is one of the significant poets that we are going to look at. Do a little background check on Eliot and see where you will locate him, if he's an American poet or if he's an English poet. And so he was born 1888, died 1965, and maybe that gives you an idea of what the modern period is. You're going to navigate your way, work through your whole understanding of the concept, modernism, and the next concept, modern poetry. To help you, I found something here from a writer, the English novelist Virginia Woolf. She declared that human nature underwent a fundamental change around 1910. And so, yes, she tried to put a date to this modernist period. And there's a little bit more there that she has to say. See what you make of it. Modernist period can be viewed or can be examined based on human relations and the people response towards what was happening during the modern times. And the loss of the human condition is characterized by loss of faith, disillusionment. They're broken. And in the global space, there was World War One. Nearly 1 million British soldiers died. And there was an era of cynicism with respect to virtues such as valor, national honor. Cynicism prevailed. Modernist periods also marked the ending of the British Empire. And then there were dictatorships in World War II and the Holocaust. There was economic depression that began in 1929. And so maybe we're saying that we could probably identify the modernist period as somewhere around the turn of the 20th century. So it might have been, let's say, 1900, 1900. And maybe you could take it up to the 1950s, 1960s. But a good question to ask yourself is, where does it end? Where does it begin? For one thing we know, it takes in the period with both world wars, one and two. And a little task here for you, write an essay about how imagery and other devices in these poems convey the mood of the times. And I've given you the titles of the poems there. Here I have more information on the term modernism, and I think I took it again from, might be the same, the previous source. It refers to the radical shift in aesthetic and cultural sensibilities, art and literature of post-World War One. Interesting to notice that the ordered and the stable and the meaningful worldview could not match up and accord with the immense panorama of futility, anarchy, which is contemporary history. And so there was a rejecting of 19th century optimism that's presented as a profoundly pessimistic picture of a culture in disarray. Quite a mouthful. What is the modernist period of English literature? And so maybe you're going to sketch your time frame. Look at the poetry reflecting the characteristics of the particular period. And so that's how we will study the period, by looking at the characteristics that reflect the period, the characteristics that you see in poetry. Identify blended imagery, or maybe there are other terms you're going to use, shifting imagery, blended themes or shifting themes, non-linear narratives. You'll find all of this in Eliot's poems. So traditional modes of writing poetry were radically transformed by the modernist poets. There's something called the stream of consciousness. Read and see what you get about it. Some of the techniques included that. Stream of consciousness is really a free flowing inner dialogue. And so we begin by looking at the Preludes by Eliot. And I'll do some of it with you, and you will have to catch up with the rest. So preludes, the word preludes tells you that it's like a preamble to something that comes after. And so Eliot's great work that he did was The Wasteland. But some of the concerns and some of the techniques, he experimented with them in shorter poems. And so you've got Preludes 1, I think there are 4 or 5 of them. In Prelude 1, you get the winter evening settling down with smells of steak in passageways and with the leaves about your feet. Once I've put it here on the slide, it's pointless for me to just go reading through the slide again for you. But here I give you the points. What is a prelude? The winter evenings as the setting in the background for the poem, check it out. What do burnt out ends suggest about life and the whole concept of living? Take the term burnt out ends and maybe it applies to cigars, smoking, and that which is just casually thrown away. And is that the way your days accumulate, or is that the way you measure? And maybe Eliot is on to something there. The description of the days, smoky days. And smoky days, maybe back to cigarette smoke, but also at the time in London that he's writing about, one of the large metropolitan cities, smog, smoke pollution was a significant problem. And so I've got all of the notes here for you to work with, so let me hurry on before time is up. When analyzing the poetry, make sure you focus on two areas that intersect. So there is one area where you could talk about the form of the poem. And if we draw circles, this is one. And if you make them intersect, then here is where you try to identify an overlapping then of form and content. In your discourse, don't keep it separate. So remember, it's literature, it's poetry. You have to look at poetry devices and you must address the content. For example, my earlier question was, look at the mood of the times, and that's the content. And you have to say what poetry devices, what modern poetry devices address the mood of the times. And so prelude number 2, the morning comes to consciousness. And pay careful attention to what Eliot does with time of day and consciousness, because it's going to recur in a poem called Prufrock, and it possibly recurs in Wasteland. Coming to consciousness, what does it suggest? And it speaks about a transition period. Evening, moving into morning. And there are certain metaphors that Eliot makes use of. It's interesting for you to work with them, masquerades. So he refers to whatever we do with time, our day to day, it's nothing but a masquerade. So metaphors are important for you to grasp and see what he does with it. Also, there are other devices that you're not quite familiar with. This one is the Sindoki. And it refers to the practice of using the part to represent the whole. And so wheels would represent the automotive. And so a classic example of Sendoki is the use of the term hands. Hands meaning workers. All hands on deck. All hands on ship. One thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. See how far you can apply the interpretation of Sindoki there. Or is it that it's not limited and restricted to people in the work environment, but maybe human action, whatever you do with your hands? I think in some religions, hands are important because hands represent all that human beings do. So work with and see what you get there. You could go through this slide slowly at your own pace and pause. So I take you to another device. This one is metonymy, the use of a name of something, and it's representing something related to it. The crown, when you're speaking about the queen. If you're speaking about the White House, Oval Office, maybe you're speaking about the president. And here you have a distinction between what is metonymy, and then you'll match that up with Sindoki. Let me hurry on. This is prelude number 3. You toss the blanket from the bed, you lay upon your back and waited, you dozed and watched the night revealing the 1,000 sordid images of which your soul was constituted. When you read that, what do you make of the poet's use of the subject position you in this prelude 3? See what he does with imagery. See what he does with literary devices. See what comment he's making about the mood of the times. And here is prelude number 4. His soul stretched tight across the skies that fade behind a city block or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 o'clock. The short, square fingers stuffing pipes, evening newspapers, and so it's human activity, but you get the sense of monotony and boredom. And there I have your questions for you again. What do you make of the use of the subject, his? So now, Prelude 4, his soul. What sense do you make of the poet's use of repetition? How symbolic are eyes? How are streets personified, and what new meaning do you get? I'm going to stop here and let you work through, and eventually you're going to be writing your definition, an extended one of what is modern poetry. Thank you.